out of San Diego, and I will be leading the session process equals progress. Is that where everyone wanted to be? Maybe you didn't want to be in this one, you got blocked out of the other ones. I don't know, but you're here and I appreciate y'all. So we will wait and see if anyone else is going to join. But at this point, I just want to kind of go over, this is going to be a little bit of an interactive session, whether you're utilizing the chat or coming off and talking on mic. Either one is totally fine, but it will be a much more engaging session if you all are participating. I don't prefer leading sessions where I'm just talking at the group for the whole time. So I hope that that works for you all. And everyone knows whatever you share, there's no right or wrong answers. We are here to really just help you all to develop and create quality processes in your programs so that you can see the growth and the progress that you hope to see. Anyone have any initial questions before we jump in? Where's everyone from? What area y'all from?
I'm from Reedley, California.
Okay, where is that?
Like Fresno area.
Okay.
Hi, I'm from Oakland, California.
Oh, okay. Perfect. Um, San Jose. All right. So we got a little bit of Bay Area. All right.
And I'm your Zoom room host, but I'm in San Jose as well. San Joe in the building.
All right. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is give people 2 more minutes. So if you want to step away, grab water, whatever you need to do right before we get started. And then at 12:05, we will hit the ground running. Does that work for everybody? Perfect. In the meantime, we'll make sure that my screen share works.
Looks good, Peter.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm excited for a small group. This training is built around really being able to be adapted to large groups or small groups, but small groups, you all will get a lot more interaction that will be applicable to your sites or to your programs. Is everyone in here a site coordinator? Or what is everyone's role? You can put in the chat. Okay, okay. As a program coordinator, does that mean you oversee multiple programs?
I'm sure you enjoyed the first workshop and you incorporate your
Want to make sure. Site coordinator, elementary school. Okay, okay.
Maya, this is your show. I am just your support team today. It's good to see everyone and can't wait for
Okay. 5 high schools. Okay. Awesome. And site coordinator, elementary school. Awesome. Becky, I was just asking everyone what their position is and where everyone was from. So if you want to throw that in the chat, you're more than welcome to do so. And then from there, we will get started. It is 12:05. All right. Perfect. So we got a little bit of everything. So we'll go ahead and get started. So again, my name is Peter Alton. I am regional manager for ARC in San Diego. Oh, see, Becky, you have 14 sites. I only have 9, so I can't imagine doing 14. I have all of our charters and our non-San Diego Unified programs in San Diego that we support. So I actually have a couple of K-8s, I have a couple of middle schools, and I have one high school. So I have all of the spectrum. When I was a site coordinator myself, I was working with a middle school. Um, but I got all of that experience. So as we jump in, just kind of framing the way we're going to go about talking today is starting with this quote. If you can't describe what you're doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing. Now, obviously, opening that up, that does feel maybe a little bit harsh, but it is kind of framing what we're going to be talking about today of if you feel like you're kind of going in circles or you see your sites that are just kind of going in circles or things like that, a lot of times it can boil down to something as simple as like, hey, what are you doing? And if they can't tell you, that might be why they don't know what's going on. Um, so kind of starting this for those of you that oversee multiple sites or are not currently running a site, think about it from what you see at your sites on a day-to-day basis. But for those of you who are site coordinators, do you find yourself struggling at your site when you have staff out for the day or you have staff turnover? So, one staff leaves or you are short for the day or short for a couple of days. Do you find yourself like, man, okay, we got to figure out how to make it work today. I don't know what's going to happen. Is that kind of the sentiment that you all feel? Um, I can kind of see some nods. Yeah. Or like when you come back from school breaks, uh, is it always feeling like you're resetting when you're coming back from break? So you just feel like you reset a couple weeks ago in January when we came back. Yeah. Okay. Here's the other important question just to think about a little bit is, do you find yourself doing things differently on a daily, weekly, monthly basis? And now this, I want everyone to think about this in the perspective of programmatically, but also in your day-to-day. So will have a focus of a programmatic lens, but all of these concepts really will translate to the way you operate in a day-to-day in your prep time or in your management and things like that. So does anyone want to share kind of in listing or seeing these questions, kind of what initially is coming to mind, the feelings that brings up, anything like that? You can put in the chat, you can open up your mic, either way. I mean, don't be shy, it's okay. All right, it's early. Well, I'll let y'all have it. If you put it in the chat, I'll go through and I'll read them, but I'll go ahead and go to the next slide. Again, so if you're thinking about all those things and it's kind of resonating with you of like, I'm always having to deal with the same little things over and over again, or I'm always going back to this, or every time I have a staff leave, it's like we're starting over. If you feel that way, I want you to kind of frame everything that we're looking forward to now is if you want to make some progress, you got to make some processes. So first, it's going to be really important for us to define what a process is and what a process should look like. So, a process is a series of actions or steps taken in order to achieve a particular end. A process and a quality process should be documented, should be easy to explain, and should be repeatable. And finally, all processes should be able to function regardless of who is present. So as we think about this in context of our programs, if you have a staff out, if you have new students, if you have new staff, whatever it may be, none of those things should throw off the ecosystem of your program, because you should have clear processes and your processes should be plug and play. Obviously, when we're down staff, it does affect things, but we shouldn't change the process. We should adapt ourselves to the process we have in place rather than, oh, we only have 3 people today rather than the normal 4. How are we going to do it? Okay, let's change everything. We want to make sure that we're able to function and make everything work and communicate it to new people extremely easily and seamlessly. Now, why are processes so important? First of all, it provides consistency. Not only do your students thrive on consistency, but your staff thrive on consistency as well. With that, one of the biggest things for you all to keep in mind is when your students start knowing what the process is, when they show up and they know exactly what to do, that makes your life so much easier. When your staff show up and they know what's coming and they're not having to ask, or there's that element of unknown, everything's going to flow smoother because everyone is going to have that initial, I know exactly what's coming. I know what I'm supposed to be doing. I know how to operate within this space. That's what you want. It takes away any sort of guesswork from staff or students. It takes away from any work that your staff would have to do to adapt to things, and just provides that consistent day. Next program will never stop. So if you have subs, your down staff, whatever it may be, again, new staff, you want to be able to continue to function the same way every single day, providing that same level of care and quality for your students. If you are realizing every time that a staff is out, things drop off or things get a little chaotic, then it's really time to go back and revisit that spot of, okay, what do we need to do? Do we have a clear process? Why was it chaotic today? What was the difference? If you're trying to go through it day to day and you're looking at it and you're like, every day feels a little bit different, it's never feeling the same, or I'm putting out the same fire over and over again. This is the one that where I really get people on it, is they're like, I'm always having to deal with this. And I'm like, okay, that's great. You're putting out the fires, but what is causing that fire to start in the first place? Can we prevent it from happening? So sometimes it's just a shift in the way you look at it, taking it down to a simpler level of, hey, this is happening on a frequent basis. Maybe we need to go back to the root of how we're running things or how our program functions. Finally, processes are important because it will allow for continued program growth. So when you have processes for all of the little things, that allows you the space and the time to focus on the big things and to focus on how to progress and take the next steps. Especially as a site coordinator, if you are finding yourself having to go and focus on all the little things, on putting out the little fires day to day, or looking at it and being like, I don't know, like their transitions just are not good, or this isn't good every single day. I can't figure it out. We've tried this, I've told them that, I've told them this. Sometimes it's okay, let's step back, take an entire system reset, and try a new process. Or do we even have a process? Can go ask your staff, hey, when we transition, what are we supposed to do? Because sometimes they're going to look at you and be like, I don't know, get the kids lined up. And that's not a process, right? They know what they're supposed to be doing, but there's not a clear purpose and process behind it. And if you're always having to focus on those things, you'll never be able to focus on the bigger things. Or if you are spending your energy focusing on the bigger things, those things are always going to continue to come up. So here's where I want to get some discussion going with you all. Where do you all feel, and think about this from a programmatic uh, and a day-to-day. So like, what are you doing as a site coordinator or in your job on a day-to-day? But if you're overseeing multiple sites, I want you to think about, like, for your sites in the programs, what is most important to have processes on a day-to-day basis. What does that look like? Again, you can open up your mic or put it in the chat. I'll give you all a few minutes to think about it. But as things come up, like, just open up your mic and go ahead and jump in. And just as a reminder, there are no wrong answers, right or wrong answers to this. I want to know where your heads are at and kind of really be able to open up the discussion. Transition periods, yeah, Connie, that's a good one. I have a few that I will focus on in the next couple of slides, and we'll dive deeper into why those spaces are important and things like that. But I want to know where your heads are at, because that's going to drive the conversation towards the end when we start to try and find solutions to some of the things that maybe are going on at site. Okay, yeah, no, Jessica, I think that that's an entirely valid way to look at it, right? It's the entire program. If you don't have processes in certain areas, it won't work. I think one of the things when we are looking at that question of, like, where can processes be omitted, it gets down to, like, okay, how nitty gritty do we want to define a process? For me, a process is something that's repeated and it looks the same every single day. There are some spaces within a day-to-day within program where you want to process, or you want to have some guidelines established, but within the function of that, things can look a little bit different. There can be different flow, different function. So I think that that's where that question comes into play. But I'm entirely with you that it is everywhere. There needs to be something in place. Teachers and community partners, I think that that's a really good one. Of do you have a communication process? Do you know what that looks like when we are executing community events, or we're communicating with teachers? Or, like, what do they want to know? What should we be communicating with them? How often? In what mode of communication? All of those things are super important. Thank you all for throwing in these answers. And like I said, there are no wrong answers, so please feel free to continue to throw answers in the chat, or if you want to, like I said, unmute and come on mic, you're more than welcome to do that as well. All right, so if no one else has anything that they would like to add at this time, that is totally okay. I will kind of move on, like I said, to some of the areas where I think that processes are most important in program. As I'm talking about these, if you have questions or anything kind of comes up as I'm talking about any one of these, or you have maybe contradictory thoughts, please throw them in the chat. Please let me know, raise your hand. Again, these are the spaces where I really love to, the discussion really will start moving from this point on of how these things can help your programs and what that looks like maybe at your program specifically. I want you all to be able to have a takeaway from this session. So, these five are not the only 5 spots within a day-to-day program that need to have a process or a clear process, but these are the top 5 for me on a programmatic level that I think are super important. Number 1, sign in and sign out. It's where we get our kids. So how we start our day, it's how we end our day. But it's also how we get paid and how we track and make sure that we had the kids there. All of those things are super important, right? Our grants are funded based on if we are getting students to show up in our programs or not. If we don't have a clear process to ensure that we're gathering that information in the way that is compliant to the grant and all of those pieces that are so important, then we're doing ourselves and our programs and our organizations a disservice. But on top of that, again, it's the way the day starts. So when your students come to show up in program, you want to set the tone right from the beginning that they can know what to expect, they can feel safe, they can feel welcomed, and they know every day at this time I'm going to line up at this spot and I'm going to grab my scan card, or I'm going to check in with this person, or whatever the process may be at your site. You want to make sure that it's the same every single day, that your staff are aware of. There's different functions within a sign-in process. I don't need them to know how to do every single one of them, but I need them to understand how it works with every space. Because one day you're going to be without the scanning person, so you're going to sub someone to the scanning space, and you're going to have to replace whoever is subbing there or find a way to adapt to make sure that you can maintain your sign-in process. And then again, sign out, that's how they're going home. That's how we're ensuring that they are safely getting to where they're supposed to be going. And I can't think of anything more important when it comes to student safety. So sign in and sign out is definitely one of the big areas where I think it is super important that you have a clear process that is repeatable and visually the same. The other thing for parents when they come for pickup, if they're having to do something different every single day, they're going to get frustrated. They'll get confused. You want that process to be seamless for them. They show up, they know exactly what they're supposed to do, they get their student, they leave. For high schools, making sure that students understand the process of, because high school, it's so, with it being drop-in, and you want to make sure that you have a clear, like, hey, when you get here, you're coming to sign in. Hey, when you leave, you're signing out. Like having those things in place so that it's clear. Transitions. Again, transitions, super, super important. It's one of the times where we have non-structured activities. So, and we're traveling from one location to another. We all know that if clear expectations aren't provided, if staff are kind of like, yeah, just line up and we're going over there, students are going to take whatever leeway they're given. So you'll have the ones who are way in the back and dragging their feet or following the leaf along the way, kicking the rock, whatever it may be. You have the one who's like, I'm ready, I want to get there, and is way out in front. You know, the one who has to, stop at every water fountain along the way. We all know that those students exist, and if we don't have clear processes for transitions in place of telling our staff, for me it was, all right, hey, you're all walking from behind the group so you can see them all at all times. You're giving the person at the front a stopping point. You need to make sure you're providing clear expectations when they are lining up. You're not just telling them like, all right, go line up, we're going here, like letting them know how to line up, what the expectation is, and when you get to the next location, you're letting them know, here's where we're going, here's what we're doing. But having a clear process, because again, there are no structured activities. So if we don't give them some sort of guidelines, the students are going to say, cool, they don't care what we do, we're going to do whatever we want. And typically what they choose to do is never what we want them to do. On to the next one, restroom breaks. So this is the only time when there is no active supervision on students. Oh, actually, I want to go back to transitions real quick when it comes to high school students. Because I know that we're not necessarily walking them from one place to the other. We're ensuring that they're going from one location to the next. That process, the difference in the way that would function and the importance with that is having a communication process between the person at the drop-in center and the club and saying, hey, I have X number of students heading your way. So they know what to expect and who to expect. Because if they receive 4 students and then 2 students that said they were supposed to be going here, now we have no idea where they are. They're signed into our program. We want to make sure that we are able to have those things accounted for and we're aware of those things. So the process there obviously looks different because we're not necessarily walking them from one location to the other. They have the freedom to walk there themselves, but are they just going there themselves with no guidance, no anything, or do we have clear communication of, hey, you have this amount of time to get from here to here, they're expecting you there, make sure that when you get there you check in with so and so. Just having that structure in place. So now back to restroom breaks. Again, this is the only time where we have no active supervision on students. Like, we send them in and hope for the best. Like, so you want to make sure that you have a process of, okay, this number of students can go in at one time. The students who are not in the restroom are standing here. At the beginning, one of, staff will go in and check it, or whatever your process is that you need to have in place to ensure student safety, and to ensure that students are aware of what the expectation is during that time. Obviously, we can't prevent students from making poor decisions in the restrooms, but we can ensure that number one, we are always aware of when a poor decision is made. And number two, we can do everything we can to limit those poor decisions that are made. Next one, programmatically, is snack and supper. So again, it's a time where we have grant requirements or local district requirements or programmatic requirements, whatever it may be, to do meal counts and to ensure that we have the process clearly set up. But it's also a time when students are getting to eat, they're getting to see their friends, and they probably are allowed to talk. And so if we don't have a clear process in place for them and what it should look like, it's a time that can get chaotic, or it's a time that can be really, really long in our day when it doesn't need to be because it's not properly organized. So with your snack distribution, if you don't have the process set up clearly and staff are just sending their kids and there's a really long line of students, well, you don't want a really long line of students because when they're in line and they have nothing to do, they're going to find something to do. When they are not clear on, okay, this group is going at this time, we're grabbing our snack, we're going to sit down, we're eating, you have to grab this, this, and this in order to do it. Your staff need to be counting. All of those process pieces are so important. And this is an area where I find most often gets thrown off immediately when staff are out. If there's a change in staff dynamic on a day-to-day, sign in and sign out and snack and supper are the 2 areas that just immediately go out the window. And I don't know exactly why that is, but I think it's because in both of those times there are staff responsibilities within the processes that are not always communicated across the board. And so when the staff that knows the responsibility is gone, then we're just trying to figure out, we'll make it work. So I think that that's where when you're thinking about, if you're thinking about these areas, and I said one of them, and that immediately for you was like, yeah, this is a pain. Like I always struggle with this, or this is one of those areas that whenever I get a new staff, it's just like we have to figure out how to teach them to do it again and do all this. That's where I want you to really kind of think about what is the cause of that potentially. Finally, for you, as whether you're overseeing multiple school sites, you're overseeing one school site, whatever your role is, the things that you do on a day-to-day basis should be done consistently, and with clear process and intent. For me, the best example I have is when we had to audit our attendance on a day-to-day basis. And so I knew I needed to figure out a process for how to physically audit the attendance. I would watch new site coordinators come in and they'd be like, it takes me like 30 minutes or 45 minutes to audit attendance. And I'm like, why? It took me like 5. Like I couldn't figure out like what was going on, but they didn't have a clear process. So they were going through looking at every single name, every single line, every single little thing. When I was like, hey, remember, you only need to look for these specific things when you're auditing. So like look at this and this. Go down the row, boom, there you go. It's providing them a process, what they're looking for. But also I went and watched a couple and they were like, they start it and then they'd get an email. So they'd check the email, or they'd get a text message from a staff and they'd check. I'm like, that's why it takes you 45 minutes. You're not like, hey, I'm going to just take my time. I'm going to do this. It's the first thing I do in my day every day. Having yourself have a process. For me, I used to take, at the end of the day, I'd take my attendance, I'd put it on top of my keyboard. When I'd come in the next day, I'd grab my attendance. I'd have to audit the attendance before I could do anything else because it was sitting on top of my keyboard. Nothing else mattered until that was done. On the days where maybe I had a meeting or I had something that threw off that flow, I would take that attendance, I'd move it to the side, and I probably wouldn't do it that day because I didn't follow my daily process. I kind of was like, I have to go do this. I know I have a really important email I have to respond to, or I know I have to jump into this meeting or this interview, whatever it is. The next day I'd come back and there'd be 2 sitting there, and some days I'd look at it and be like, I don't want to do 2 days. So then I'd move it to the side, and then there'd be 3 days. And then by 3 days I'd look at I would know, like, if I don't do it now, I'm gonna have a week's worth in a couple of days, and I'm gonna then have to spend an hour getting this done. But that's how, for me, I knew if I didn't do it at the beginning of program the way that I was, like, I had set my process up, I wouldn't get it done. And so your day-to-day, the things that you're going to do every single day, checking emails, checking the site phone, like whatever it is that you have to do on a day-to-day basis, provide yourself it doesn't necessarily have to be a schedule, but a process of what is the order I'm going to do these things in? How is this going to function? What is this going to look like? The same thing should be said for your staff who are prepping. If they're doing prep work or they're doing anything, they should have that time looking the same. And, just all of those things that everyone's doing these things on a daily basis. We want to make sure that they have a clear process and a clear setup to be able to do that. For those of you just joining, thank you for joining. We are just reviewing some spaces where processes are super important in our programs. No worries on jumping in the middle. You're totally fine. We are just kind of diving into this part of it, and we're gonna, as we move forward, kind of jump into some discussion-based pieces centered around processes in our programs. So looking at the next slide, I want you all to, let me see, how many people do we have now, Kroll? I think 8. Let's do, let's go ahead and do 2 breakout. We'll do 2 breakout rooms with 4 of you in each one to provide a space for some small group discussion. So within that, even if you haven't been with us the whole time, you are jumping in at the perfect time right now because things that I've covered up to this point are just kind of some periphery things. Where we're going now is diving deeper. So identify where you struggle most in your program and then think about, do we have a clear process in place? If I went and asked my staff, can they tell me back the process? Can I explain the process? If not, maybe that's where we need to look at it. If you can, then maybe it's how do we update or tweak the process to make it so that it functions better? And then, do you have a process that you would like to implement or improve? Do you need help brainstorming? So think about that. If you're like, after this discussion, I really want to implement a process for this, but I don't really know what that looks like. Does anyone have any ideas? Having that discussion and going from there. So I think my ask for you all is we'll take, probably looking at the time now, it is 12:37. So by the time you jump into rooms, it'll be right around 12:40. We'll go for probably about 15 minutes on this discussion. And I want you all just to really utilize each other. There's a lot of smart people in the room. Bounce ideas off of each other of what would really help you, what wouldn't, where you're struggling. And for those of you that oversee multiple sites, so the way I look at this in my role and the way that I think that it's super beneficial to think about it is maybe kind of looking at your sites as a whole. And do you see a common thread? Do you see excuse me, so sorry. Do you see a space where there's a common struggle that might be process related, that you can then help them to implement a process across all of the sites or across all your locations? So think about it that way, and then we can come back and have discussion. But Julie, are those perfect? So Grohl's gonna go ahead and open up those breakout rooms, and we'll give you all till about 12:50, 12:55, somewhere in there.
All right, Peter. I have 2 randomly assigned groups, and then I have it set to automatically close in 15 minutes.
Perfect. There we go.
All right, here you go.
We'll see y'all in 15 minutes. How are those breakout rooms for y'all? Good. I see some nods. All right. All right. Well, I hope that you bring whatever energy and conversation you're having in your breakout room to the big group here. Because the next, I'll say about 25 minutes, so till about 12:20, we go to 12:30, and I do have a couple of slides, one last slide to really wrap up on, and one topic to wrap up on. But the next 25 minutes is dedicated to you all. So again, I want you all to be able to have a takeaway from this session. And so if you have a topic or an area that you talked about in your small group that you want to continue to have discussion around or have questions about, this is the time and the space for us to do that, and kind of game plan, and I can provide some feedback or some thoughts, and we can get the room's thoughts. There's a lot of smart people in the room. So does anyone want to be the brave one to start us off and elevate something that they talked about specific to their site or their role?
I think we touched on in my group the fact that, this is just what we do is constantly changing. It has changed, and it will change. I mentioned that for me in my role here at the district is, we have 11 schools in our district. And so me stepping into this role just this year, this academic year, it's been a challenge because of, past practices, neither good nor bad, but just past practices and what teachers, community partners, parents have been used to terms of registration, in terms of just, the support that they get when they're on site, with their clubs or tutoring, or just the vendors. And then, the understanding that comes with that, in terms of the process. And then next thing you know, oh, this happened. Well, then this process needs to adjust. So we need to change. And so my learning from this is that, it will change, but then, what is it that I think, oh gosh, one of our members said it really good, because you still have, just like it's in teaching, you always fall back on your standards. That's always what you connect back to when you're a teacher in the classroom, is you have your standards. You don't deviate that. You can expand on the standard, but then you don't deviate from that, because those are your grade level standards that you have. So in that sense, when your role as or my role as as a coordinator now, that's one of the things is, okay, what is it that you have to hold them to? And number one is attendance. So you have to have a system for that in place right there, because that's, funding is attached to that. Understanding your funding guidelines, and then also being aware of, the commitments, or not the commitments, but I would say the understanding that you have between the teacher unions, your MOUs, or, and then classified staff as well. And then also the training that goes along with, after the training, the communication that goes along in terms of just how to implement that particular protocol, whether it's signing in, it's signing out, it's early release, it's funding for programs, even something as simple as the email communication, that's understood as well. So sometimes we want to just send away an email very quickly, or I'll find myself want to do that, and then right before I hit send, I'm like, oh wait, I better ask somebody before I send that out, because, the emotionally you want to respond right away, because you want to help. But at the same time, is what you're saying necessarily going to be putting you in a position later on where you have to defend yourself to like an auditor or something like that, because you didn't have the or you didn't have the, I don't want to say understanding, but you didn't have the patience maybe to go back and say, oh, wait a minute, let's go back and check on this. I could send that email. I don't need to respond right away. So those are kind of the challenges, yes, that we talked about right there, but always having like your foundation for that process. Always the why, I guess, is what somebody said.
Yeah.
Is that a clear understanding of that leads to just kind of putting that together. Yeah. But those are the challenges, I guess, that come along with the things that we talked about.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point of the things are changing constantly in our field. Students change constantly. Their needs change constantly. Sometimes the spaces that we are provided change constantly. That's something that I get a lot of when we talk about this is, hey, how am I supposed to implement a process for sign in when I never know where I'm signing in until an hour beforehand? Like sometimes 95% of the time we'll have this space, but then there are days where they tell us that we can't do it there. It's finding, like you said, I think the core elements or the why or what is the important pieces to that. Yes, every location is going to have its own process. But if I move from the MPR to a classroom or to just outside of the MPR, well, the students know the process is the students grab their card, they line up, they go here. Okay, we just same process, different location. Same this, different spot. So it's finding, like you said, okay, this tweak in the process, the auditing guidelines, or this tweak in community guidelines, or whatever it is. Okay, hey, we do everything this way. The only piece that we're changing is this. Right. And so keeping the fundamentals of it in line, and something we're going to talk about too, as we on the last slide, is that just because a process is working doesn't mean it's perfect. And so sometimes those changes are going to come in or things like that. We'll talk about that a little bit more too, but I agree, change is a constant in our field. And so understanding that we're going to have to adapt to things is a really key piece of this process. Right. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the hard part is just knowing that we're in a field where we have educators that have been teaching for 24 years. And, we implement structure and we go by that. And, this year to year, it might change a little, but then we get comfortable with the things that we know work. So
Mhm.
when we're asking, teachers in this case to kind of, oh, we're going to change this, change that, that's sometimes that's a frustration point for some professionals. They don't like that. Like, well, why can't we go back to doing this? Or why can't we do that? So yeah, that's the
Yeah,
challenge.
no, definitely the rigidity and the pushback from staff is definitely a thing as well. Um, and it's always trying to just remind them. I know a lot of times when we're making changes, it's to either make their lives easier or to make students' lives better. And typically, like if someone's going to argue with me about making their life easier or a student's life better, I have a hard time having that conversation, right? Because I'm like, well, these are the two, really, I'm trying to make this easier for you and better for the kids.
Right.
So if you don't like either one of those things, maybe this is like we'll find another spot or find someone
Right.
else or whatever it
Right.
is. But I think it's all about how we frame it when we're selling changes, right? If we come in and I know in my role, I had a bunch of staff who have worked with different managers and different things, and I do things very differently from my colleagues. Um, if I had come in and said, "This is how we're doing things now," and didn't ask questions and didn't do anything and was just very like, "Here we go," I'm sure I would have gotten a lot of pushback, and that would not have gone over so well for me.
Right.
Um, Instead, it was, hey, here's how I would like things to look. What is that like? How's that sound? How does that land? What does this look like? Here's my reasoning behind it. And so then it was, we have those discussions. We try and work with those people to get them to buy in and be on board the
Mhm.
best we can.
Right.
Awesome. So, anyone else have something come up in their group or to their site that they would like to share about? Or anyone have anything to add on what we were just discussing? Like I said, one of my goals for you all is to be able to provide you with takeaways. So if there's something that is kind of jumping out to you, feel free to open up the mic so we can discuss it.
One of my questions was the process of training staff. So
Yeah.
we find in an after school program, we have a lot of turnover because they're young kids, college kids, and so they, come and go. And so training new staff is almost impossible because a lot of times staff have left and we're filling a hole already there. They're thrown in, they have to automatically go into ratio. There's not a lot of, okay, you're going to follow me around for 2 or 3 or 4 days to get the process. It's really like do or die, jump in. And so the process of training staff properly is what I find is really lacking in our field because we often have to just push them into ratio with very little experience or training.
Yeah, so a couple of things. Number one, thank you for sharing. I do think that is a common thread throughout the field. Um, Internally at my organization, one of the things, so my role prior to being a regional manager and overseeing multiple sites, I actually helped to launch our training department within our company. Um, and one of the things that we implemented for our new hires was they come in and they have to spend one whole day in training of just kind of getting the basics of we'd go over behavior management, um, line of sight, supervision, building relationships, like proper relationships, boundaries, just giving it was stuff they should probably already know if they're planning on working with kids and working at a school site, but things you want to make sure everyone's aware of. And then some like company policies and things like that. Once we do that, one of the biggest things that I always talk about with my site coordinator specifically is remembering that even though you're down staff, making sure that staff, you don't scare that new staff off by throwing them in and ensuring that they are prepared, is so important. And so I used to, even if we're utilizing them to be in ratio, I would always tend to say, put them with your most experienced staff, put 40 kids with that, or put as many kids as you can while being in ratio in one space rather than sending them by themselves. Yes, they are in ratio with that group, but rather than it being they're off on their own, sink or swim, they're kind of taking a back seat to this person, getting to watch them operate, yes, in a larger group, letting them know, hey, there's gonna be a lot of students. You're gonna still have to operate within this space. But if you've already been functioning down staff, 1 or 2 more days of functioning while being down staff to allow that staff to see someone function within program, understand it, pick it up, is such a benefit for that staff that even if you don't have an onboarding or a training process, giving them that space to, even if it's just one day, hey, you are going to follow this person around, see how they function. There's going to be a bunch of kids in there. It's going to be a little more chaotic than it might normally be. Just kind of help redirect behaviors, help do this, but that's the only thing I want you to do. I want you to just observe them and get a feel for the day, and then come have questions for me as a site coordinator at the end of the day. It sets that person up for so much more success. A lot of times because they are young, maybe this is their first job or their first time working with kids. And Grohl and I were actually just talking about this in our, while you all were in the breakout rooms. We pulled some numbers internally and we found that if staff made it past the 3-day mark, which for us is their first day on site, if they make it past that, they're going to be there for at least 6 months. And then if they're not there past that, they're probably a student and didn't prioritize making their schedule work, or it was not they were like not tied to the job, so they knew the next semester was starting, they'd find a new job because their class schedule allowed for that. That's something, what we've found is if they make it past that, they're there for 2 to 3 years. And so getting them through that 3rd day though is like you'd be surprised at how many don't make it. They get to site, they see what's going on, and they're like, I'm scared. I can't do that. This is not what I thought it was going to be. I'm overwhelmed. I got thrown in. I don't know what I'm doing, whatever. And so I think it's just that balance of, we want to bring people in and we want to get program back to the way we want it to look, but also understanding over on this side, this person being prepared to take over a group is going to guarantee that they stay and we don't have to refill that spot. So 1 more day or 2 more days of them being short-staffed with the extra body there is a huge benefit in the long run. I think that really is kind of the way to look at it, is they're already having to do it short-staffed. So rather than throwing these people in because we have them, let's prioritize them being prepared to take over, so that when they do take over, it's not the site coordinators having to go help them every 2 seconds because they're freaking out. No, I'm good to go. I got it. I know the schedule. I know everything. And they hit the ground running. Then it's like, oh, hey, program's back to where we want it to be in a more effective manner than it could be. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes.
No problem. We have about 10 more minutes for discussion time. Does anyone have like 1 or 2 last topics that we want to elevate to the group? If not, that is okay. We can kind of move to the final section of the presentation. So I'll go ahead and reshare my screen. Can you all see my screen? Perfect. So here's the last thing, and this kind of goes back to what we were talking about with change being constant and things like that. But this is the idea of it should be constant and to a certain degree, because we want to be aware of complacency. No process is ever perfect. So when you find that you're functioning and you're moving and things are going really well, and you're really happy with where things are at, that's the perfect time for you to look around and go, what can get better? At the most basic levels, because sometimes that's really where you get those, like, you're like, yeah, attendance is working. Like, we're getting it all scanned in, we're getting it all gathered the way we need to. Then you look at it and you're like, this is sort of inefficient. Like, we could probably make a better process. But you're not going to see that if you're looking at, is it functioning? Sometimes that's the most important thing. Like, we have a process and it works. Once you get to that point of we have a process and it works, now is when you take the time to sit there and go, is this the best possible process we could have? Or let's look at it as a whole. Is it really, are there things we can do to improve it? Next, always be looking for ways to improve and innovate. Now, one of the big things with that innovating idea is being open to receive feedback and input from staff. So whether you're a site coordinator, a coordinator, or a manager overseeing multiple sites, whatever it is, we all have our vision and our ideas of the way things should function. We're going to hire new people who are going to come in and challenge those ideas or provide, hey, have you ever thought about doing it this way? Don't be the teacher who's worked for 24 years and is not open to change. That really is one of the biggest things that I can impart on you today. You're going to be able to get it to where everything functions. I have no doubt about that. If you're in this role, you have the skills, you have the tools to be able to get it to where everything functions. But sometimes someone's going to come in and say, hey, have we ever tried doing it this way? And I know that instinct to be there of like, you know, it works, so we're not going to mess with it. It took us forever to get to this point, so we're just going to leave it. So thank you for the idea, but no, we're not going to do that. Is there. I know it's there because I've had it. Especially if you've been fighting to get to a place of functioning. But never shut those ideas down. If there is a time, if it isn't the right time to make a change like that, that's totally fine. But telling that person, hey, I actually really like that idea. I don't know that right now is the right time. Let's revisit this when we're in a place and a space that we can look to elevate. We can look to innovate and make our processes better. Because I like the way that you're thinking. I never thought about that. Even if you think it's a terrible idea. Because truthfully, they might bring you a couple of terrible ideas before they bring in the good one. Because they're going to come in not knowing the field, not knowing things. They're going to come in being students, being kids, and seeing things so differently that, yeah, they might not, like, they, in their mind, they're like, why don't we try this? And you're like, that would never work because of XYZ. Or like, that might work, but we can't do that because of XYZ. Validate them bringing it to you, validate that, because they're going to come to you one day with, hey, instead of having the students all line up, why don't we have each group leader just have their cards and give them to the students individually, and they can do it. They can take them to you in a group. We can send them by groups or whatever it may be. And you're going to be like, oh, I never thought about doing it that way. That's going to be so much cleaner. That's going to get them seated faster. That's going to do this. It's going to do that. It's whatever it may be. Sometimes that one little idea that is framed differently than any way we've ever looked at everything is going to be the one that improves processes for us. And so it's super important for you all to not close yourselves off and not be open to change, because it is very important for you all to take as many ideas and points of feedback as you can from every angle, whether it's a staff, a student, some random parent. Like, we all know those parents who come pick up and be like, why do you do this? Like, have you ever tried that? Like, my kids really like this. You're like, yeah, it's not super helpful, but thank you. Sometimes you're going to get those helpful ideas, and we want to always make sure we're open to them. And so that's really the last thing I have for you, is just being open to the changes. Because we never want to think that just because it's working, it's the best possible thing we can do. With that, that is all I have for you in terms of content to share. I am more than happy to hang out for the next 13 minutes and answer any questions anybody may have that came up, or anything like that. Otherwise, I will give you, I can give you all about a 10-minute break before we have the end of the day. Grohl, it's plenary at 1:30, I think. Trying to look for my, 1:45. Okay. So we have about 20-ish, 25 minutes between now and then. So if you want to be able to have an opportunity to have a little bit of an extra break, that is totally fine. Otherwise, I am here. I will hang out until 1:30 to answer any questions or anything that you all may have. But I am super appreciative of all of you buying in, having conversations. I hope that you all had a takeaway from this, and this was beneficial for you in some way or another.
Thank you, Peter. Hey, one thing I was going to add, you reminded me of this when it's like, oh, well, we've just always these situations, right? Oh, why do we do it this way? Well, we've just always done it that way, and sometimes there's nobody even left there that knows why something is done a certain way. So I know to me, it's all about asking questions, why? And then, okay, so maybe that is still the right way to do it. But asking questions and understanding, the context, and then applying that to that continuous improvement process. So
Yeah. Perfect.
thank you,
Well,
Peter,
thank you
so
all.
much.